science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I felt
right.
But I was so
And I just thought,
happy.
well,
I had figured it out
it was that golden moment.
because science was on my side.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Story Collider, where we bring you true personal stories about science. We are your hosts, Erin Barker
and Liz Neely. And this week, in keeping with our recent themes, turns out we're presenting stories about being unprepared.
I think a lot of us felt unprepared for this current moment in time.
I mean, yeah, how could we not? I'm somebody who loves my spreadsheets and my color coding and my plans and my strategies, and being unprepared, so profoundly unprepared, it just hurts, and it's upsetting and scary.
Yeah, for others of us, the feeling of being unprepared is a little more familiar, but still, what can we do about the fact that we feel so unprepared right now?
Oh, I have a couple ideas. And for me personally, the first is just acknowledging the fact that we can't predict, all the worrying and all the attempts to control everything are not going to help us be better prepared in the future. That's the nature of disasters, right? But for me, another really big idea is what's called the cycle of panic and neglect. This is something my husband Ed wrote about before, that when an emergency hits, we all freak out. But then once it passes, we tend to do things like we cut funding and then we relax our preparedness measures. And so what I am doing is, I had recommended early on in this pandemic taking up personal journals, writing about our experiences day to day, inspired by you, Erin, and Matt Dix's Homework for Life. But what I'm going to do is look back at those journals and try and remember what it felt like and what I was worried about and what I needed, what I wished I had done, so that hopefully in the future I may not be able to predict what's coming, but I won't have slipped into that cycle of neglect.
That makes sense. And you'll be able to tell better stories about it this way too.
Well, not thanks to the help of an amazing team of producers. I certainly hope so.
Well, speaking of which, let's see how our storytellers today dealt with being unprepared for their situations.
Yeah.
You want to introduce the first one?
Yep. Our first story is from Jack Walsh. It was recorded in October 2019 at Highland Inn and Ballroom Lounge in Atlanta, Georgia. The theme of that night was Deal With It.
My wife was in the hospital. She was pregnant, so that wasn't necessarily unusual, but something was wrong, something possibly life-threatening, and I had a decision to make. The day before, Michelle had called me at work, and she'd had what was supposed to have been a routine appointment with her obstetrician, but all of a sudden she was inconsolable, and she told me, doctor, hospital, blood pressure, something about clams, induced labor help. And that's about all I could make out in between the sobs. By the time I got to the hospital, she'd calmed down a good bit and could explain to me that preeclampsia is a condition not uncommon to first-time moms-to-be, and the symptoms include dangerously high blood pressure and also elevated protein content in the urine, which also sounds dangerous. But if not treated, preeclampsia can turn into eclampsia, which can cause seizures, heart attack, organ failure, brain damage, or death. So obviously you want to treat preeclampsia before it progresses, and the single most effective way that medical science has found to do this is just to go ahead and get that baby out of there. Now, we hadn't gone into the weekend planning to have a baby. I mean, that was on the eventual agenda, but, that was still supposed to be a month or so off. What we had planned on doing was going to see The Dark Knight, the Batman movie with the creepy Joker and all that, which had just opened, but obviously plans had changed. And the doctors wanted to keep Michelle under observation for a couple of days before they made the determination about whether or not to induce labor. From the start of all this, the idea of having a baby was just kind of something I went along with, much as I pretty much go along with anything my wife really insists on. Sure, a baby. If you say so, that should be fun. Not that I didn't want to have a kid. I did. It was an exciting idea, but that was just something that was going to happen in the future. Abstract concept baby was great. Possibly tomorrow baby was all of a sudden a very panic-inducing idea. I mean, they told us at the infant care class that I could impale and kill our baby with a rectal thermometer if I wasn't careful. Well, I'd never even changed a diaper before, and we were supposed to have a month left. And now, for Michelle's body to throw us this biological curveball, a dangerous one at that, had really shifted the timeline forward to an unnerving degree. There's that part in The Dark Knight where the Joker is going on about how people deal with things just fine as long as, they're part of the plan. But the second you introduce a little bit of chaos, they lose their minds. So I was trying not to think about how real everything had just gotten, about how suddenly everything had changed, because the alternative was to freak out. Now, you might surmise from what I just said that I eventually got to see The Dark Knight. Eventually is a very relative term. Back to that decision that I mentioned earlier, while my wife was hooked up to machines, peeing in a cup, possibly about to have our child, I decided to go to the movies. And I want to make it very clear here that it was Michelle's idea, or at least her suggestion, because I'd be lying if I said the thought hadn't occurred to me already, because we were just sitting around with nothing to do, and her condition had improved somewhat, and she seemed perfectly comfortable. And then if the baby did come, we'd have to wait for the movie to come out on video, and someone might spoil it for me before then. I mean, nobody wants that. Now, you could suppose here that in some way I was, with this, trying to desperately, some might say, trying to prolong my child-free existence. That in a film about an orphan who dresses as a bat and beats up a guy dressed like a clown, I perceived some escape from impending adult parental responsibility. I mean, you could suppose that. But anyway, I went to watch Batman, and no one needs to hear another nerdy white guy giving his opinions on The Dark Knight, so I will spare you my assessment of the film. It's so good, you guys. But then that night after the movie, I was back at home having a late dinner when the phone rang, and it was my wife's doctor, who maybe should have explained things to me calmly instead of just turning the phone over to Michelle, who told me blood pressure dangerous, induced tonight, come back. Or, something to that effect. Driving to the hospital that night was like speeding headlong into the unknown. Or really, speeding headlong isn't the most accurate choice of words. It was more like overcompensatingly slow and hypervigilant because I'd had a couple glasses of wine with dinner. But it did have the feeling of heading into a maddeningly uncertain future. I was going to be a father in a matter of hours. Or maybe my wife was going to have a seizure and die. Given the gravity of the situation, I was really starting to feel bad about sneaking out to the movies. The induction process ramped up gradually until by sometime in the morning, the intensity of the contractions had rendered Michelle mostly nonverbal and had left me feeling really powerless to help. Just as she was in the middle of a very severe wave, just moaning and convulsed in pain, housekeeping arrived, blowing in like a Category 5 hurricane of aggressive Southern hospitality. How y'all doing? She bellowed and bustled right into the bathroom and flipped on all the lights and got straight to work, which, judging from the sounds, I can only guess entailed bashing a pair of crash cymbals against every metal surface she could find. But that was still not loud enough to drown out her singing. What a friend we have in Jesus. My wife, who is Jewish, moaned along in a kind of agonized interfaith harmony. Now, obviously, what I should have done was ask the nice screaming lady to, hey, maybe come back and do that a little bit later. Then, okay, thanks. But I think we've already established I wasn't really making great decisions, re things not going according to plan, panicking, chaos, etc. And so what I did instead was get a pillow and put it over my wife's head. You know, like I was trying to murder her. In my mind, I was blocking out all the light and sound and stuff like that as if she'd had a migraine or something rather than another human forcing its way out of her. As it turns out, she did not find this helpful, and I got the message when she took a couple swings at me. But eventually the housekeeper screamed her goodbyes and moved on to torment the next woman, and I went back to just kind of rocking helplessly beside the bed. From this point, though, it pretty much unfolded, I guess, the way we thought childbirth was kind of going to go, with a lot of pushing and attentive nurses and anxious grandparents rushing to the hospital, and eventually me cutting the umbilical cord attached to a tiny, shaking, crying, screaming red person. That night, as my wife slept and I held the baby, I also found myself crying and shaking, although I did manage to stifle any screams. Here was this little 5-pound thing that kind of looked like me. A little thing we named Stella, by the way. And I was fully, terrifyingly responsible for her for forever, or at least a span of time that felt very much like forever in the moment. And along with everything that hit me at once, joy, relief, love, exhaustion, came the overwhelming feeling that I was absolutely not ready to be a parent. I'd finally let this catch up to me. Now, would I have felt ready several weeks later when the baby was supposed to come? Fuck no. My wife took instantly to parenthood. I did not. And I won't enumerate all the struggles and frustrations and self-recriminations and lingering guilt and additional crying fits of the first several years of parenthood for me. But mistakes and learning from mistakes and therapy and also Zoloft have made me, if not a great parent, then at least more willing to forgive myself when I'm not always the best one. Or to thoroughly bastardize yet another part of The Dark Knight, I may not always be the father my kid deserves, but I can usually manage to be the one she needs right now. Not a day passes that I don't still suspect that I'm not ready to be a parent. But with time and practice and experience and even a whole second kid who came in a completely normal, timely fashion, I've come to realize that no one is ever really ready to be a parent. You just adapt moment to moment. And even when things sort of go according to plan, there can still be chaos and maybe you kind of lose your mind, but then they go to sleep and you take a deep breath and you do it again the next day until at some point you can no longer imagine your life without them. But you do suspect that you would get to go to the movies then a lot more. Thank you.
That was Jack Walsh. Jack is an Emmy Award-winning television producer who describes himself as, and I quote, a generally engaging storyteller, a halfway decent writer, and the world's worst guitar player. He has performed at the Moth, the Atlanta Science Festival, and DragonCon. He's a native of Canton, North Carolina, and he now lives in Decatur, Georgia, with his wife and 2 daughters.
Thank you, Jack. We have many wonderful stories on the podcast about pregnancy and giving birth.
We do. And in a twist from our normal roles, I have a story recommendation today.
Awesome. Let's hear it.
In 2017, science writer Kate Gammon told a story about her own pregnancy, labor, and delivery that shocked me. And talk about being unprepared, both like her and her husband, as well as me as a listener. It's a great one.
Yeah, she was definitely unprepared for the moment that happens in her story.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to our next story, I want to just remind everyone to check out tonight's live online show. We have been putting together shows every week on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find them at storycollider.org or at crowdcast.io/thestorycollider. We would love to see you there. We have a pretty good time.
I love it. I mean, you host, I just get to be, an avid member of the audience. But in my highly biased opinion, it's fantastic. And what I like too is that it's the sense of sort of community and everybody's chatting with each other, but also the storytellers are as far as you can be from Unprepared. These are amazing stories. Like, what are they normally, like 7 to 9 minutes or something like that? It's
6 to 8.
I'm really proud. And I just want to say, come join us. It's fun.
I like that thematic integration there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Always thinking.
What's the best way to learn a new language? Immersion. But sometimes that's not in the cards. But you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Now, I might only be 1 week into learning German with Babbel, but I'm so excited to start being able to speak German with my mom. With Babbel, you can learn everything you need to have real-world conversations, and all it takes is just 10 minutes a day. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college, which is bonkers. But Babbel is conversation-based learning with science-backed cognitive tools like spaced repetition and interactive lessons created by real language teachers and voiced by real native speakers. So here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/story. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/story. Spelled BABBEL.com/story. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Our next story today is from Jeannie Gaffigan. It was recorded in March at Le Poisson Rouge in New York City at our last show of 2020. The theme of that show was Brains, Brains, Brains.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here at the last gathering of a lot of people in New York City. I'm really honored. So, yes, I have this book called When Life Gives You Pears, and the title has to do with the fact that I had, in 2017, a pear-sized brain tumor removed, and it was actually the size and shape of a pear. An inverted pear. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story, but not the whole story because I want you to read my book. Shameless plug. So anyway, one of the things that I wanted to just start out with was just something that has really been on my mind lately, which is the fact that I really went through a period of time when I was about to have brain surgery, because I had like discovery to brain surgery was like 3 days. So, because it was kind of an emergency. And a thought occurred to me when my husband and I were rushing to the ER after we saw the film from the MRI that we couldn't get our hands on, but we knew that like my ENT, I had a hearing loss. Sudden hearing loss, and I went to through like a month of taking Flonase and, resting, and it didn't go away. And then so I ended up getting an MRI, and the MRI revealed that I had this giant thing in my brain. And it was like the ENT was like, peace out, you need to go to brain surgery. And so on the way to the ER, that we chose a hospital that was like an hour away, because we Googled what's the best place to get brain surgery in New York, and it wasn't like across the street. So, and we went to the ER there because my friend who I grew up with is a neurologist in Milwaukee, and I was given an appointment to see a neurosurgeon in about 3 weeks, and I just couldn't, get the diagnosis of a brain tumor and wait 3 weeks. So I needed to kind of like get it checked out. So I sent the film, which I couldn't read on my computer because I didn't even have a disk drive on my computer anymore. I don't think anyone does. My husband FedExed the film to my friend in Milwaukee, and he, the next day put it into his hospital computer and texted me. He's like, you need to go to the hospital. He said, if you were here, I'd put you in the OR today because you're like a ticking time bomb. So we, Googled. He said, just go to the ER and they're going to look at the film and send you to neurosurgery. They're not going to be able to do anything with it, but you need to make a plan. So as we were speeding up the FDR, I had this observation, and then I'm going to continue the stories, but I want to just, this is what kind of struck me. I'm setting the scene. We're going up the FDR. We passed the old-fashioned Pepsi-Cola sign across the East River in Queens. It reminded me of Mimi, my mom's grandmother. I'd never met her, but every time my mom comes to New York City and we're on the FDR, she brings up being in Mimi's Tudor City apartment as a child and looking out at that sign behind the water. My mom's memory was now my memory. I wondered if I was going to be able to have memories anymore. What would that be like? To not be able to have memories anymore. My kids might not have a mom who gifted them her memories. So I just wanted to start there because there was a certain point where I just realized that I didn't know what was going to happen to my brain. And my brain is me. So if I'm alive and I don't have a brain, am I me? So we get a little bit closer to the hospital, and my phone rings, and my ENT, when he found out I was on the way to the ER, instead of waiting to see the neurosurgeon that he recommended, he called Mount Sinai and had a colleague call me before I went into the ER and had some sleep-deprived intern open up my skull with a rusty butter knife or whatever he thought was going to happen. And I wound up waltzing right into the head of neurosurgery's office without my insurance card. And I was used to like being put on hold, and it was like, I call it the parting of the Red Sea. And I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I walked into like the top neurosurgeon's office without them knowing my name. It just was like a series of little coincidences and miracles. And I had my film, and he put it into his computer, and his whole office had big monitors all over it, because the way they do things now is very technologically advanced. It's like there was my scan, and there was this giant thing in my brain, and when I saw it, all of a sudden I felt like I could kind of feel it, even though I had been walking around just like, I can't really hear out of this ear, but completely high functioning. So I was like, how am I looking to my brain and seeing this thing that is in there that's not supposed to be in there? And he's like, are you having headaches? And I'm like, well, I have allergies. So yeah, I do get a lot of headaches. And he's like, are you, ever dizzy? And I'm like, yeah, but I don't drink enough water. Do you get head rushes? It's like, when I stand up sometimes after sitting, but I should really get one of those standing desks that everyone's talking about. And then I realized that I had been like compartmentalizing all my symptoms, and kind of when they all were told to me together, I was like, whoa, I guess I have the symptoms of having a brain tumor, but I wasn't really paying attention to myself. And so, of course, the question that I, asked first was, is it cancer? Do I have cancer? Because you hear brain tumor and you think cancer. And he said, I don't think that it's cancer. And I said, well, why would you say that? And he said, because if you had a cancerous tumor that was that size, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Because cancer grows very rapidly. Cancer cells grows very rapidly. And this tumor, from the way that you're reacting right now and the way that you're just walking around, I am pretty sure that this tumor was growing insidiously for about 10 years. And the reason why you're able to just like walk and talk and do all this stuff is because they compared it to like if you put an elephant on a clothesline. So if you have a clothesline and you hang an elephant on it, the clothesline is going to break. But if you slowly over 10 years keep hanging different things on the clothesline and then eventually put an elephant on it, it's really not going to feel the stress as much. And so it was really kind of interesting for me to kind of think of this tumor as an elephant in my brain, because all of a sudden it kind of felt like it was an elephant in my brain. So what happened was he said that he was going to have to take a lot of pictures. I was going to have a full day of scanning. And then he was going to create a virtual map of my brain. So he would be able to look through this kind of VR surgery technique where they can take away blood vessels and show where the nerves are. Because as one of our other performers mentioned, the cranial nerves, there's 12 of them, and they all do really important things. And one of the location was on my brainstem. So it was in a really vital place. And what was running through the tumor was my facial nerve. So he said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to save your facial nerve, but you're going to live. And I was like, yes, I'm going to live. And I was like, oh, I don't care about my facial nerve. He's like, well, you're probably going to have facial paralysis. And I was like, I already have a husband. Like, I'm going to be alive, right? I mean, I could be a head in a jar and I'd be like, I'm winning. So I had like a couple days to, after the scan, I had 2 days to sort of, get my, things in order, which I did nothing of, and went into the hospital, and I had an incredibly successful surgery. They got like almost every single piece of that tumor out, and my facial nerve was saved because of this amazing VR surgery and this incredible team of surgeons that I had. And everyone was super happy. And I'm going to read you another observation that I made when I woke up from brain surgery, if I can find it here. Okay, here we go. I guess I had brain surgery. I mean, that's what they told me. But I can't be certain because I wasn't exactly conscious. Again, no posted sign. That's a callback from later, but you have to read the book to... Okay. All right. When I first opened my eyes, I was propped up slightly, and I saw the stark lighting of the hospital and medical people walking back and forth. I couldn't move. Or maybe I could, but I just didn't try. It took a couple seconds for me to realize I was awake and the surgery was over. Immediately after that, I realized I'm me. I remember thinking, I was me. What a simple thought. And how horrifying that if I hadn't had that thought, if I had been brain damaged, I never would have thought that. So that's really like, I think, therefore I am. Because what would happen? I mean, I would have never, even if I was alive, I wouldn't be me. And it was just like this unbelievable feeling to realize that I was me. And I couldn't, tell anyone, I'm me. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk, but everything was there. And I knew that I had brain surgery. So this was a incredibly happy moment for me. And then I remember nothing. All of a sudden, lights out. And I woke up, and all of a sudden it was a completely different situation. I was in a different room. I had tubes coming out of me. There were machines everywhere beeping, and everyone was running around in a panic. And I was like, what happened? Eventually, I realized that what happened was that my brain had gotten used to having this big pear in it. And so when it was gone, all the nerves kind of got all like wiggly. And that's a medical term. And my breathing and my swallowing, which we take for granted because, our brain does all sorts of things that we don't even have to think about, got all intermingled. And sometime during the night, I had breathed in my saliva into my lungs and enjoy your cocktail. And I aspirated, and I developed double lung strep pneumonia in the hospital. And that bacteria, I mean, it's like, coronavirus, Shimonavirus, because it was really gross. So, and I was I was intubated. So I had a tube down my throat. I had a tube up my nose. I had tubes in my arm. I had machines everywhere beeping. And I was pissed. I wasn't scared. I was so angry. I was like, what? It was this, I just got through brain surgery, and now I want to get up. And I couldn't talk. I couldn't express myself. And I was like, boy, this would have been so much better if I was brain damaged. No, I never had that thought. So anyway, long 300 pages later, I get out of the hospital and go home, but I have a tracheotomy, a peg tube, and 5 kids at home waiting for me. And so, I wasn't really able to kind of resume my normal life because all sorts of, things happened that took me a long time to recover from. So, the biggest, challenge, I think, of my recovery was the fact that I could have nothing by mouth. I could have no water, no food, nothing. And because I have 5 kids and I'm used to being under like a pile of them all the time, and they were not allowed to come to the ICU where I was for a while. And they now could, kind of not touch me in anywhere. I started to kind of experience this feeling of starvation from, food and from affection at the same time. And so I was kind of nervous that, once I was able to embrace my child, I might accidentally eat them because I was so confused by all these feelings I was having. So for me, not being able to eat, I wouldn't have known it was going to be so challenging, but it was extremely challenging, especially since almost every single person that I knew that loved me, that wanted to express their concern for me, sent huge amounts of food that looked and smelled really amazing over to my house. And my kids love it. And you have to understand, like, I am married to a man who's like made a career out of eating. And it was, so he would, help me out by eating all the food. So that was very nurturing. But the other thing that would happen is that I would get really emotional when I would smell food. So he would be so kind to like sort of hermetically seal me in my room and like stuff towels under the door and have like essential oils so I wouldn't smell like the like constant flow of lasagna that was always cooking in my house. And so during this period of time, I had a lot of therapists coming over and helping me, like physical therapists helping me like walk again with a walker, and a occupational therapist that was basically there to help me resume like things like buttoning and all these things that I sort of had to relearn doing. And I'm a really hard worker, so I worked really hard at it. And I got, I buttoned and unbuttoned my clothes so many times I felt like an ingenue in Hollywood before the Me Too movement. So, anyway, at a certain point, the occupational therapist said, okay, I think that now you're ready to do something meaningful to you that you around your house that you can kind of like accomplish and feel like you're part of life again. And I said, I want to clean up my basement storage because nobody has put the bikes away. And she was like, no, that's, and I was like, but that was like, you have to understand who I am to understand that that's really what I wanted to do. She's like, no basement storage. So she was like, how about like making breakfast for your children? And I was like, but food, it was like kind of like, it was like kind of an ex-lover that you're like, can't see, you don't want to run into anymore. And, but I agreed to make the food, to make breakfast. And so anyway, when I, make scrambled eggs, I, don't, scramble the eggs in the pan. It's just not my way. I sort of, fold them over with a spatula. So they're kind of like big, fluffy bites and not like little bits. And that's the way that my kids like them. And so, Katie, my daughter, who was like 7 at the time, she said to me, Mom, I just really want to learn how to make eggs like you make them because nobody made eggs like this. And so I got really into making the eggs. And I, taught her how to make the eggs. And we had this really fulfilling moment where I didn't need to be eating or, experiencing food in the same way to sort of nurture my child with this food. And it was this really amazing experience. So that night I felt like I was getting back to normal. And I was so happy, even though I still had like tubes and a tracheotomy, big, tube sticking out of my throat that had to be like suctioned out. It was lovely. And I got into bed and I was like, wow, I just feel like this. I got into bed. I wasn't like getting out of bed. I was getting into bed. So it's like getting out of bed used to be like a big treat, but now like getting into bed was a treat because I was actually like up doing things in the house and I felt like so good. And I looked down at my hand and I had these big like blisters all over my hand. And I was like, Jim, did I get bit by a radioactive spider or what is actually happening? And he said, that looks like a burn. And what I realized is that, this is later, we kind of figured this all out. There's something called the spinopathic tract. I don't know if any medical people here know what that is, but, the right side of my body was not sensitive to temperature or pain suddenly. And so when I was making the eggs, I like put my hand on the stove and I didn't feel it. So then I realized that, back to normal is going to be a new normal. And so right now I'm living my life very well, but I'm in a new normal. Thank you, everyone.
That was Jeannie Gaffigan. Jeannie is a director, producer, and comedy writer. She co-wrote 7 comedy specials with her husband Jim Gaffigan, the last 5 of which received Grammy nominations. Jeannie was the head writer and executive producer of the critically acclaimed The Jim Gaffigan Show, and collaborated with Jim on the 2 New York Times bestsellers Dad is Fat and Food, a Love Story. Jeannie's own book, When Life Gives You Pears, debuted on the New York Times Bestseller List. And Jeannie, with the help of her 2 eldest children and some other moms, created the Imagine Society, Inc., a not-for-profit organization that connects youth-led service groups.
Man, Erin, I have to say I'm a little intimidated by our lineup today. We've got an Emmy winner and a Grammy winner. It's impressive.
You're going to go for the EGOT.
We are so grateful to Jack and to Jeannie for sharing these stories with us. And the Story Collider is also so grateful for the support of Science Sandbox, a Simons Foundation initiative dedicated to engaging everyone with the process of science.
The Story Collider is led by me, Artistic Director Erin Barker.
And me, Executive Director Liz Neely. We couldn't do it without the help of our Deputy Director Nissa Greenberg, Operations Manager Lindsay Cooper, and the rest of our amazing team.
The stories featured in today's podcast were from shows produced by Emma Yarbrough, Mesa Salida, Nissa Greenberg, and Zach Stovall.
The podcast is edited by our podcast team, which is Jun Chen and Gwen Hogan. The theme music is by Ghost.
Special thanks to Highland Inn and Ballroom and Le Poisson Rouge for hosting these shows.
And for everybody out there who's dedicated their lives and careers to trying to help us be more prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for listening.
Stay safe.